Along with everything else going on today, today is also the first full day with MAGA Republican Mike Johnson as the United States Speaker of the House. He only became Speaker in the first place because a small group of House Republicans who previously expressed their reservations about installing essentially an insurrectionist as second line of the presidency appeared to get over those reservations in a matter of days. Do you remember earlier this month, Colorado Republican Ken Buck was everywhere, talking to everyone, saying he couldn't support Steve Scalise or Jim Jordan for Speaker because they would not give him a straight answer on whether or not they believed the 2020 election was stolen? Pretty simple question. But Ken Buck voted for Mike Johnson, one of the key architects of Trump's attempted coup. In fact, every Republican in the House supported Johnson for Speaker. And that's been the consistent story, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year in the Trump era. Depressing, defeated cowardice of so-called principled conservatives as the Republican Party slips further and further into its dark authoritarian hovel. One of the only elected Republicans in Washington who's managed to defy that trend and remain relatively consistent in their public critiques of Trump and the MAGA movement is, of course, Utah Senator Mitt Romney. On substance, Romney is a conservative. He hasn't gone over to being a Dem or a Lib. And he always has been. He's a conservative Republican. On questions of democracy and Donald Trump, he is squarely in the camp of preserving America's Constitution against its foes. He voted for both impeachments of Donald Trump. He was the only Republican in the Senate to support the first one. Last month, Romney announced he will not run for re-election in Utah, but he did agree to sit down for a new, incredibly confessional book with McKay Coppins, who got unprecedented access to one of, I think, the most interesting figures in 21st century American politics. I'm joined now by McKay Coppins, staff writer at The Atlantic, author of Romney: A Reckoning, which is out now. Now, viewers of the program have probably seen you and seen excerpts of the book, but I want to just take a moment to plug the book, which is truly excellent. And people should read because it's so well done and so well written. And I've been reading it, and I've got to read a lot of stuff for work, and I really actually enjoy reading it. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I want to start on this, the Ken Buck question, the kind of, I think Romney views this through the lens of his faith.
Yes.
And, you know, he's a man of faith. Mormon, you're a man of faith. All of this in this sort of sense of a grander test of virtue. Like, and I relate to it too as a Catholic, like a man for all seasons. That like the devil is out there to tempt you.
Yeah.
And he's out there to tell you all this can be yours if you just compromise. And watching everyone compromise has driven him a little nuts. It's made him very angry, but it's also sort of, I think, what comes across in the book is that story he's telling himself about his own ethical nature is key to how he has navigated all this.
No question. I mean, the thing, when he talks about it in public, he talks about principle and integrity. I think there's also a, theological part of this where he could talk about the light of Christ or whatever in Mormon theology. But essentially, he sees this moment as a testing moment, right? This is a moment when he's seen one member of his party after another, in his view, sell out their principles, sell out their beliefs and ideals to win re-election. And they tell him in private, we agree with you, but we can't say it in public. And he really does, he actually gets this from his dad in a way, I think, that he frames things in a kind of right versus wrong, good versus evil template. And he sees what's happening in the Republican Party and what's happening to the country as alarming and frightening and bad, wrong. It's not just scary, it's wrong. And he wants to be remembered as somebody who's standing up against it.
Yeah, you mentioned George Romney. George Romney is a fascinating figure for a million different reasons.
I could write a whole book.
Yeah, I mean, he really is a really interesting guy. Of course, he was the governor of Michigan. He had run one of the big three auto companies where he was CEO. He was also, he was the head of HUD during racial integration, where he was actually an incredibly important Republican voice for desegregation in housing. You write about this in 64, where he played a similar role in the party back then. That he went to the RNC to try to warn against Goldwater.
That's right.
The warning went unheeded, and a couple nights later, the delegates enthusiastically lined up to support Goldwater, who declared victory by needling his do-gooding detractors. Extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice, he said in his speech. When the convention hall erupted in applause, George remained quietly seated. His teenage son, who traveled with him to San Francisco, was sure one thing. If thousands of people were cheering and Dad was standing alone, I knew he was right and they were wrong.
again, he sees this as a moment of a test of integrity, of character. His dad standing athwart history, yelling stop, right? Which is funny to borrow that conservative terminology because actually Mitt Romney, I think, inherited from this experience a distrust, a suspicion of movement conservatism, right?
Right.
It always existed outside of it, whether it was in the 1960s with the rise of the radical right of the Goldwater Republicans, or, you know, right now with the rise of the pro-Trump MAGA Republicans. He is, like you said, he's a conservative, but when it manifests in this right-wing populist movement, he's repelled by it, and he exists. He's afraid of it in some way.
I mean, Mitt Romney is repelled at a cellular level by populism of any kind.
To
be clear, right? Like, that's part of what's happening too.
No, well, I mean, he has this riff. He said it 100 times to me that, you know, for every question there's a populist answer that is popular and wrong, right? He is. He's not a populist figure, but there's something specific about right-wing populism, and especially in this Trump era. I think he sees in the rise of Donald Trump an echo of what his dad went through.
Yeah, and yet he made his pact with it. He made his own pact with the devil in 2012, and of course he did the event with Trump quite famously.
And he had to court that right wing, right? He had the advisors who taught him, you know, you need to start reading the National Review. You have to start paying attention to what Fox News says. You need to learn the language of the right so you could try to win them over.
I remember him ripping Rick Perry's face off at a debate for being soft on immigrants, attacking him from his right. The Mike Johnson scenario and the 21 days of, I mean, I saw Romney today saying that, you know, maybe you should have a speaker who has some experience, which I think is a pretty good idea. That seems to me like just a perfect little microcosm, right, of how this all plays out. Do you come away, having covered this topic for as long as you have and written this book, with some clearer vision for a proper intervention other than like virtue, backbone, principle, all these things that Mitt Romney talks about? Or maybe that's it.
No, I mean,
maybe it's just character.
I think it's character, but there is something else. You know, Mitt Romney said to me in one of our last interviews, he was making this point that, like, part of what changed for Mitt Romney in these last several years is he stopped thinking about trying to become president and started thinking about his legacy, how he would be remembered, what his obituary would be. And he said he thinks that if there was some way to get other Republicans to think less about the immediate news cycle or the next election and more about what their grandchildren are going to remember about them, that their calculation would start to change. And that's not just like a righteous, idea. It's also, there's some vanity involved. All politicians want to be in the history books.
I was just about to say, he has a high degree of moral vanity. And one of the things that comes across as someone who also has a fair amount of moral vanity is that it's a very salutary thing to have. Like, in the end, right? Even if it's like you have some conception of yourself as being a good person and not wanting to fail a test, and there's some vanity that attends to that, it actually forces you maybe to do the right thing. McKay Coppins, check out Romney, A Reckoning, wherever you get your books. Thanks a lot. We'll be right back.